Hello, everyone. This is Wayne Lee, CEO of Lee Enterprises Consulting. I'm going to give it about 15 or 20 seconds for the other people that are joining, and then we will take off. So welcome, everybody, to the webinar. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get it kicked off, and we'll go from there. People can join as they come in. Again, this is Wayne Lee, CEO of Lee Enterprises Consulting. I want to welcome all of you to the first of our 4 webinars sponsored by our group. I'm going to start us off by giving everybody a bit of information about Lee Enterprises Consulting and about our upcoming webinars. As most of you know, Lee Enterprises Consulting is the world's largest alternative and renewable fuels consulting group. If you have visited our website, which is www.lee-enterprises.com, you will note that we have right around 60 experts. They are from all over the world, and each works in a different area of renewables. Our group is divided into 5 teams. We have an emerging technologies team, an ethanol team, a wind and solar team, a biodiesel team, and a financial team. We have 4 upcoming webinars, which, like today's webinar, are all free. On October 22nd, we have a biodiesel webinar hosted by one of our group, Susan Olson, who is a vice president at Genscape. That webinar will cover how to be successful in today's biodiesel market, and it will feature speakers from Genscape, FC Stone, and Tenaska, among others. On November 18th, we have an ethanol webinar hosted by another of our group, Jennifer LaRoe, who is the manager of biofuels compliance at Murex. The November 18th webinar will cover how to maintain a competitive edge in today's ethanol market, and it will feature speakers from Murex, ICM, Christensen and Associates Accounting Group, and Plagley Financial Group. And then on December 16th, we have a solar and wind webinar. That one is hosted by Bob Parkins, CEO of Parkins Solar and our wind and solar division chief. It will cover how to assess technical and financial feasibility and how to secure investment in solar and wind projects. This one will feature 3 of our professional engineers in the wind and solar sections, as well as one of our Washington, D.C. law firms, which is involved in securing investment for alternative and renewable projects. Since all these upcoming webinars are about a month away, the registration pages are not ready and won't be ready until about a month in advance of each of the webinars. However, if you know you're interested in attending any of these, you can go to our Lee Enterprises website and pre-register. Once you do that, my office will make sure that you get notified of the link to register once formal registration begins. And before I begin, one special thank you. I want to give a special thanks to Genscape, in particular, Nicola Segal, for their hard work in putting this webinar together for us. Thank you so much, Nicola. Now, moving to slide 2, as you can see, Lee Enterprises Consulting offers a wide variety of services. Most of our routine items are covered in this slide, but since our requests are quite varied and wide-ranging, not everything we do is listed here. If you have a question about renewables, a good place to start would be to call our home office. I would also encourage you to go to our website, as it contains a wealth of information not only as to our services and but also as to the credentials of each of our experts. Again, that website's www.lee-enterprises.com. When you visit the website, I would encourage you to take a moment and specifically look at our press room page. In addition to the press about Lee Enterprises Consulting, this section also contains blogs from our experts on a variety of subjects of interest to those in alternative fuels and renewables. For example, this month's blogs have included one from our grant writer about the Economic Development Administration's $10 million 2015 Regional Innovation Strategies Program. We had one from one of our PhD enzymatic experts about the enzymatic production of biodiesel. We had another from one of our PhDs about the potential of making biofuel from bugs. Yes, I said bugs. And we had one from one of our 2 accounting firms about state income tax opportunities in renewables. So I would encourage you when you go to that site to look at the blogs. And speaking of the accountants, let me make a quick observation to avoid confusion. When you visit our website, you will find that not every member of our group is listed. For instance, you will not find our attorneys listed there, although we have 2 of the largest and best-known law firms in renewables within our group. You also won't find our accountants listed there, although we deal with 2 of the best-known accounting firms in the renewables sector. The reason for this is that these folks, the reason they're not on our site is that there are apparently some professional regulations governing certain professions that dictate exactly where and how they can list themselves on non-lawyer or non-accounting websites. But suffice to say, our group is very large. I talk to the consultants daily. We talk as a group on a regular basis. And hopefully, without sounding too presumptuous, I think I'm safe in saying there's probably very little that goes on in the alternative and renewable sectors that does not touch some Lee Enterprises consulting group member at some point. So with that, let's move to slide 3 and get ready for today's webinar. As you can see, today's webinar is going to cover the state-of-the-art in biomass pyrolysis. On this slide, you will see a list of our group members that will speak and their topics. If you are in this business already, it's likely that you recognize many of these names as they represent the top talent in the world in their fields. With that said, I'm not going to steal Dr. Kootenai's thunder in introducing each of them to you, so I'm going to limit my introduction to Dr. Kootenai, who will be your host for today's webinar. So moving to slide 4, Dr. Gerald Kootenai is the Director of Emerging Technologies Group for Lee Enterprises Consulting. He has a PhD in chemistry and many, many years of experience. I talk with Gerald on a daily basis as he coordinates all of our emerging technology projects. He puts together the right teams for us with each particular project. He works with me in getting timely and accurate bids out to our emerging technology clients. So if you have an emerging technologies project, Gerald is very likely the first person you're going to talk to after your initial call to our home office. He is a very knowledgeable expert and a close personal friend of mine. Dr. Gerald Kootenai, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Wayne. That's a very kind introduction. I appreciate that. The title of my presentation today is The Commercial Status of Pyrolysis Ventures. And what this is a database of over 900 ventures that have been collected in the pyrolysis sector. On slide 6 is a summary slide of bioenergy technologies. They can be grouped by various methods. I've chosen the ways shown here. What we're of interest today is the thermochemical ones. When you look at thermochemical technologies, combustion is probably the best known of the bioenergies. And the group in the light green is what is called pyrolysis, which in other words is the thermal processes in a low or no oxygen atmosphere. They include torrefaction and its product biocoal, slow pyrolysis and biochar, fast pyrolysis, including bio-oil and biochar, hydrothermal, which includes biocrude and biochar, or hydrochar, and gasification, spin gas and biochar. In slide 7 is a graphic representation of the thermal gradient that really represents the different pyrolysis technologies. At the low end, you have various processes, including the first major one, torrefaction. Most of the pyrolysis and hydrothermal are in the black region that you see in this graph. At the very top, you have the high temperature range where you get gasification. In slide 8 is a summary of the over 900 ventures I mentioned to you before. For example, I've broken down here by the different pyrolysis technologies on the left-hand side versus the various regions of the world. We won't go through all the data today, but just shows a breakdown between the EU, US, Canada, and the rest of the world of where these ventures are found. Now, over 900 ventures is a lot, but of course, a lot of them are only virtual technologies. They're not commercial enterprises, but it's hard to tell which are real and which are not. The other thing that we've done in this database is try to estimate the commercial stage of development of each one of these ventures. Now, this is a debatable definitions in its own right. These are the definitions that I've used here to separate the different ventures. The one that's probably the most contentious is what makes a true demonstration facility of a technology. Industrial scale equipment is commonly used to define it, but I've also added the category that must be proven on continuous operation. So in the definitions I've used in the database, this is a technology that has to be run for at least weeks on end on a continuous basis or a batch for that period of time. Very few of the new technologies actually finish this stage. On slide 10 is a brief summary of what I call the ashes of pyrolysis. Of those over 900 firms, some of them no longer exist. And you never see announcements usually when they fail, except in the very high profile ones. Where they show up is when you go to their website and it's marked under construction or it's dysfunctional. Some of these that there's been no updates, they're essentially stale websites with no progress. Of those 900 firms, this is going into the database as shown in slide 11. This is an example from the very beginning of the biomass gasification database, where the database has the name of the company. The number that's beside each company is the degree of their stage of commercial development. And then there's a brief summary of the technologies. Some, there's a lot of information available. Some, there's not very much at all. And there's hyperlinks included to each one of the entries. On slide 12, we're looking at how the different stages versus the ashes and the ones that are still in existence. Companies in blue, the numbers in blue represent the companies that still appear to be operating. The ones in red are the ones that are defunct. The table divides it by the different types of pyrolysis technologies on the top versus the different stages of commercial development on the left-hand side. You notice on what I've defined pure commercial hasn't been there yet for any of these technologies. Some of the more interesting ones are the ones that are on the demonstration side. The numbers here are much more limited, and they're certainly dominated by biomass gasification. Why is there such a high failure rate? 1/3 of those companies that originally got into it, and often they're very serious, sometimes operated by brain engineers or technologists, some with good financial backings. This graph here is a typical technology valley of death that high capital enterprises, as most pyrolysis technologies are, have to go through. This is a time scale of cash drain. And so as you go through the various steps, which when you're talking about capital intensive industries such as pyrolysis, it takes years to develop these technologies. And so the cash drain on these, negative cash drain on these technologies is very severe. I don't mean to be negative about these technologies overall, as there are some very exciting new ones that are coming into the demonstration stages right now. And the later speakers will talk about this as we go into the other presentations. That concludes the presentation I have today on the pyrolysis commercialization. I'm pleased now to announce our next speaker, Dr. Hugh McLaughlin. I had the pleasure of working with Hugh in a biochar venture for a number of years. Hugh has a PhD in chemical engineering and is a leading expert in biochar. The title of this presentation is Biochar Industry Trends. Hugh?
Thank you very much, Jerry. So I'm going to take a real liberty because these slides will be sent out to people, and that gives you an opportunity to revisit some of the text. There's some concepts on the slides I'll be showing that I want to focus on, and then there's some explanations that people can get to revisiting, and then hopefully it all makes sense. So my topic today will be biochar industry trends. And I'm now on slide 16 of 67, and that says, biochar, an old solution to a new problem. Well, the old solution is the fact that Mother Nature has been burning down land-based vegetation for 600 million years with lightning strikes, and the new problem is the fact that by taking fossil carbon and pumping it into the air as CO2, we've disrupted the balance of the climate. So I want to initially establish quite firmly in people's minds on slide 17 the fact that a tree is operating in essentially a short-term carbon cycle where that carbon is cycled from the atmosphere as CO2, the gas, through photosynthesis to become a biomass and energy for the tree to live, and then at the end of the tree's life, and that can be during the tree's life, there are sugars produced that are extruded out through the roots, and they feed microbes, etc. So there's an ongoing respiration, and then at the end of the tree's life, it has accumulated some biomass, but that biomass will rot, and actually, ultimately, a tree is in a neutral scenario because the carbon is spending a part of its time in the soil and a part of its time in the atmosphere, but it's oscillating back and forth. And on the next slide, 18, if we look closely at a tree's operation, and these are generalities, if I look at 200 carbon dioxide atoms in the atmosphere, the tree will fix them with photosynthesis and then turn around and use about half of that sugar for its own daily diet. And then the other half will be used either to create additional biomass, additional tree structure, or being used to grow seeds, or being used to feed soil microbes. But if we note up just above the top, it says net carbon withdrawal from atmosphere 0%. And indeed, everything is cycling around. Now, de facto, if instead of letting the tree die and fall on the ground and rot from microbial activity, we were to, in fact, harvest that tree and use it for a fuel source, we would, in fact, be getting essentially the same carbon dioxide cycle. We would, however, be gaining some energy by burning the wood, and we would be displacing some fossil fuel requirements. So in a perfect world, we have a situation where if we replaced all of the fossil fuel uses with biomass sources, we still would be essentially at a carbon neutral balance for the atmosphere. We would have no mechanism for drawing down the atmosphere. And this is where biochar distinguishes itself. If I intervene, as shown on slide 19, at the end of the biomass life, I'm not advocating cutting down living trees, but they're all going to die eventually and they can be harvested. And we intervene with the carbon and we put it through a process called pyrolysis. And this is where we gasify or we pyrolyze the wood, heat it, we devolatilize it, pulling off a gaseous fuel stream, and then we convert the solid residue into what's called biochar. And that process is called carbonization, or the making a more carbon-rich solid. So if you note up at the top, net carbon withdrawal from atmosphere, 20%. And that's because the carbon that has exited as a solid out of pyrolysis has been chemically modified, and it now has a property that makes it less likely, in fact, virtually a portion of it completely unlikely to be degraded by microbes in the soil. So on slide 20, we note that the net effect is that we can pull 20% of all the carbon atoms that the tree ever even encountered, that it ever extracted from the atmosphere, and deposit them in a stable form in the soil. And basically what's happened is the carbon in the carbohydrates and in the lignocellulose has been converted to graphite. And graphite is an extremely chemically resistant and biologically resistant form, and it remains in the soil. And this is really a very pivotal distinction that I need to point out. Biochar and charcoal are chemically quite similar. The difference comes a little bit down to use. Charcoal has basically been optimized to be a fuel, and it's produced at a much lower temperature than biochar. Biochar is produced at between 450 and 700 degrees Celsius in the absence of excess oxygen, because any oxygen would just react away. And biochar has this property shown by that purple pyramid, which is the property of essentially absorption like activated carbon has absorption. And this is very pivotal because it acts to retain moisture in the soil and also be synergistic with the microbes. So charcoal and biochar are both black. Charcoal and biochar are different. And that's a key concept, and it really prevents charcoal industries from selling their fines into the soils and having substantial benefit that we can obtain with a good biochar. So on slide 22, I reemphasize that the real effect of pyrolysis is to have taken some of that uncharred organic matter and converted it into a graphite-rich form, which now has some very unique properties in the soil, but the most important property from the climate standpoint is the fact that it is going to be resistant to biological decay and will be there for 5 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 years, a significantly longer time than we normally see. So wrapping up, there's a real list of biochar facts, and these all get elaborated into properties that modify the soil and the soil dynamics, and I think it's unrealistic to try to go beyond kind of just flagging them. And later, people that are interested can see how they manifest themselves in growing systems. And then on my last slide, amazingly, I will get to the topic of my slide, which was in the past we saw biochar, the phenomena being represented by really almost any black residue, whereas now we're seeing a real migration to quality and the absorption property being a major quality and a couple of other metrics like leachable sugars. And what we're now seeing coming out because of the demand for biochar and the potential is dedicated designs to produce biochar of the appropriate quality and also to harvest energy and heat from the process. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much. Jerry?
Thank you, Hugh. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure now to introduce Doug Bradley. He was the past president of the Canadian Bioenergy Association and currently a director of the World Bioenergy Association. The title of Doug's presentation today is Pyrolysis Oil Markets.
Okay, thank you very much,
Doug?
Jerry. Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Jerry. Okay, so moving on to slide 26. I'm going to be, after hearing Jerry Kootenai talk about all of the technology failures in the last 15 or 20 years or so, I'm going to talk about what the winners are doing. I'm going to look at the new capacity growth in the 2014 to 2015 period. I'm going to look at the early and current markets of these producers, then upcoming and future markets. Then I'll look at market size in Europe and Japan, and then look at the impact of the oil price decline on these markets. So moving on to slide 28, this is a graph of the productive capacity over time. You can see that from 2006 to 2013, the world capacity stuck around 75,000 tons, except Dynamotive got into the business in 2007 and built the two world's largest plants, but they succumbed to the economic contagion that was affecting the world at that time. But look at 2014. A new plant was built by Fortum in Joensuu, Finland. In 2015, the Empero plant started up in Hengelo in the Netherlands. That was in May. And the Green Fuel Nordic plant in Finland is now under construction. So you can see there's a major uptake in terms of activity. And these plants that have either operating plants or under construction have announced new plants as well. Moving on to slide number 29. This is a favorite slide of mine. I borrowed it from Ensign. You can see that pyrolysis oil has actually been made since 1989, used primarily in the renewable food and chemicals market in the United States. In 2004, it was used to replace fuel oil in industrial situations and now in institutional and commercial heat applications. In 2009, Dynamotive succeeded in powering a turbine with pyrolysis oil and fed power economically into the Ontario grid before succumbing to financial difficulties. In 2013, Ensign succeeded in powering diesel engines with pyrolysis oil, and so that's one of its new future business models is to develop power in remote locations by way of fueling diesel engines. I'm going to talk about green gasoline in just a moment. So moving on to slide number 30. The current markets, Red Arrow in Wisconsin has 6 small plants. It's still in the food ingredients market and building heat. Ensign's Renfrew plant still ships pyrolysis oil 1,200 kilometers to Red Arrow and now has contracts to heat New Hampshire hospitals. Now keep in mind that not only is it economic to replace fossil fuel with pyrolysis oil, but it's economic to ship at 640 kilometers to do so. Fortum in Joensuu, Finland, they now use it to replace heavy fuel oil for heat at Fortum plants in Joensuu and Vermont, and I just learned that they are now shipping their pyrolysis oil to other Fortum plants in Sweden, and when they reach capacity, they will be replacing light and heavy fuel oils in local district heating plants. So moving on to slide 31. The Empero plant in Hengelo, Netherlands, they're using it to replace natural gas to produce high-pressure steam for a dairy and for a multinational coatings and chemicals company. I believe they're also still talking about making heat and power for the University of Twente. Green Fuel Nordic, you recall, which is under construction in Finland, is going to use it to replace heavy and light fuel oil in industry, and also to produce heat and electricity for municipal customers. So moving on to slide number 32. This is where it gets interesting. Future markets, and I'm not talking about the far future, I'm talking about early future. Ensign has run over 200 trials on mixing its pyrolysis oil product with crude intermediate in existing oil refineries to produce green gasoline and green diesel, which is indistinguishable from 100% fossil fuel gasoline and diesel. So this is going to be one of its major markets. Not going to say anything about Malaysia. This is the project whereby they're going to power local areas with diesels. Hasn't been much in the news, so I'm not going to convey any more information about it. They've already announced the second plant in Finland by Fortum. Fortum, UPM, and Valmet recently signed a 5-year agreement to upgrade pyrolysis oil to full transportation fuels. So that is the direction they're taking. And Green Fuel Nordic, also in Finland, has named a number of markets, but also added the possibility of fueling marine diesel engines. So moving on to slide 33, I'm going to talk about numbers now. I recently completed a private study for a customer examining markets in Europe and Japan. This graph shows various sub-markets, some more than 4 million tons, and so on down the line. At today's $50 a barrel crude price, the market in these 7 EU countries is 14.3 million tons. Now that's huge. if the oil price goes back up to the $80 per barrel level, which it is anticipated to do, this market increases to 18.5 million tons. So moving on to slide number 34. On the left side, the first markets I expect will be industry because they would tend to have larger volumes and single customers. And you can see that some of these markets are willing to pay $45 a gigajoule for pyrolysis oil. The green space is the cost of delivering imported pyrolysis oil to Europe, which you can see is between $10 and $15 a gigajoule. So you can see that there's some exciting business opportunities there. On the right side, the secondary markets are anticipated to be residential and commercial. They are willing to pay much higher prices, as much as $81 a gigajoule, which makes them quite lucrative, but they require some more infrastructure investments. Moving on to slide number 35. This explains the impact of oil price movements on the demand for pyrolysis oil. The blue lines show the prices that these customer markets are willing to pay. Some $23, $24 a gigajoule, and moving down the line to $20 a gigajoule. You can see that if they can import pyrolysis oil between $10 and $15, they will gladly substitute their oil for pyrolysis oil. The pink lines represent what they're willing to pay at the $50 a barrel level. So you can see that there's still a number of markets on the left which remain lucrative even at these low oil prices. You can see on the right side there are some sub-markets that they may be willing to pay $13, $14, $15 a gigajoule, and they will be forced to buy pyrolysis oil from some of the lower cost regions like Malaysia. Moving on to slide 36. Now let's talk about Japan for a moment. Most Japanese power companies are multi-fuel. In other words, they make their power from petroleum and LNG and coal. They're trying to increase their renewable fuel by adding pellets to the coal. Some of them are reluctant to do so because of the increased cost of infrastructure and also the limits to the amount of pellets that can be added to the coal. Now look at Kansai. Kansai, 29% of its fuel is petroleum. So they don't even have to go the pellet route. They can simply replace their oil burners with pyrolysis oil burners, add some stainless steel tanks and piping, and they've got their renewable fuel. Moving on to slide number 37. This is just a map of Japan showing the number of thermal power plants that are on coasts that would enable them to buy pyrolysis oil from low-cost pyrolysis oil-producing regions. Moving on to slide number 38, this is a summary total of the EU 7 countries that I examined. At $50 a barrel crude, the market for pyrolysis oil, both primary and secondary, is 54 million tons. At $80 a barrel, this rises to 59 million tons. But look at Japan. Over 100 million tons of pyrolysis oil is the market there. I'm running short of time, so I'll blow by this one. I'm simply trying to put together a biotrade fund that will invest in plants, supply chains, and terminals worldwide to export pyrolysis oil to needy markets. My last slide, you'll see that capacity has doubled in the last 20 months to 9 plants. Pyrolysis oil is being transported economically by truck, train, and ship. There are active growing markets in the United States, Finland, Netherlands, and Sweden. And in the 7 European countries I examined, prices customers will pay far exceed the delivered cost. And the market in Europe and Japan is huge. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Excellent presentation. It's my pleasure now to introduce David Edwards. He's Vice President, Sales and Marketing for Zeton, the recognized leader in the world in design and fabrication of lab-scale, pilot, and demonstration plants. The title of David's presentation is Scaling Pyrolysis Technologies. David?
All right, Gerald, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to present today. Just in way of background, for those that are not familiar with Zeton, Zeton specializes in the design and fabrication of pilot plants, demonstration plants, and small modular production plants. In the last 10 years, we've designed and built a lot of pilot and demonstration plants and production plants for pyrolysis processes, and that will be the focus of our presentation today. So moving on to the next slide, which I believe is slide 42. Title of my presentation is Scaling Pyrolysis Technologies. So pyrolysis pilot plants and demonstration plants have been notoriously difficult to scale up. There's a number of reasons for that. We'll cover some of those reasons in the presentation today. And I'll also give some examples, some photographs of some of the plants that we have built successfully and that have worked successfully as well. So the good news is that the methodology for scaling bioenergy and biofuel technology plants, including pyrolysis plants, follows a similar scale-up process to what is traditionally used in the CPI, the chemical process industry. So what are those steps that are used in the chemical process industry? Traditionally, it's been a 4-step process, beginning at the lab or bench scale, where small plants are used often in batch or once-through type configurations to generate some raw data. And based on that raw data, some initial data is produced, which you then scale up to a pilot plant. The pilot plant is really the main tool used in process development. It's often where you are doing continuous production for the first time. And the plant you see there is actually an FCC pilot plant, fluidized cat cracking pilot plant, that's been converted to a bioenergy process. From pilot plants, the need often goes to a demonstration plant where you are operating the plant continuously for many weeks on end, producing significantly more material, often for market testing. And then beyond demonstration, for the processes that make it through that stage and the funding's in place, the plants then go to commercial. So what are some of the challenges that are faced by pyrolysis processes as you scale up from lab scale to pilot to demonstration to commercial? Here are some examples of the types of challenges that are typical of these thermochemical conversion processes. Solids feeding, solids processing, including char handling for pyrolysis processes in particular. Tar formation and removal in gasification processes, and bio-oil condensing in pyrolysis processes. Hot gas filtering in both pyrolysis and gasification processes. Bio-oil upgrading, stability, and the varying physical properties of bio-oil. For example, the density of bio-oil can vary from being greater than water to less than water, and that can, in any type of processing scheme, that can cause complications. High temperature solid circulation, hot ash removal, pressurized solids feeding, and a few others. These are all examples of challenges. The last one is varying physical properties of biomass, for example, moisture content and physical size as well. So these are some of the challenges. Some guidelines in terms of scaling up bioenergy processes. This slide is probably the heart of this presentation. It talks about the differences or compares what scaling factors are typically used in the CPI industry to bioenergy. So if you look at CPI, where pilot plant would be a scaling factor of 1, as you go down to lab scale, you might be scaling from a factor of 10 or a factor of 1,000 down to lab scale. Whereas for bioenergy, it might be a factor of 10 to 100, so an order of magnitude difference. And that order of magnitude is then repeated as you go larger. So rather than going from, let's say, a factor of 100 to 1,000, for CPI, you're going from a factor of 10 to 100 for bioenergy. So really, the recommendation for bioenergy processes, including pyrolysis processes, is to take a smaller scale-up step by an order of magnitude compared to CPI. So the next series of slides really present some photographs. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So here are some photographs of some plants that Zeton's built. We've altogether completed over 750 projects, many of which were for bioenergy type processes. Here's a lab-scale solid feeder which can feed at pressures up to 700 psi at rates up to 100 grams per hour. So very difficult to feed very small flow rates of solids. This is a custom batch feeder that operates at high pressure. Another example is the next slide, which is slide 49, which is a lab-scale ebulated bed reactor for bio-oil upgrading. So taking pyrolysis oil and upgrading it using hydrogen to create a fuel. And this operates at 25 grams an hour of bio-oil feed. It's a continuous plant, actually, and operates around 450 degrees C. Scaling up now to pilot scale. This is slide 50. This plant, as I mentioned before, is an FCC pilot plant and is been modified to convert to bioenergy. So it's a biomass catalytic cracking pilot plant operating at 1.5 liters per hour. And the next pilot plant is an IH2 pilot plant, which has an integrated pyrolysis and hydroprocessing step combined together and operates at 2 kilograms an hour. And this process is currently being scaled up to commercial scale. Here's an example of a demonstration plant at 15 barrels per day, which was used to produce commercial quantities of bio-oil for testing purposes, operated in Pasadena, Texas. And here's a plant that went to Hawaii. It was a DOE-funded project and operated at 1.5 tons per day of biomass feed. It's a pyrolysis process as well. The next few slides, this slide is the final demonstration project. It combines thermochemical processing with catalytic processing to take biomass to ethanol at 260,000 liters per year of ethanol to biomass to ethanol. The next three slides are commercial plants. This is a plant for Red Arrow that was built in the 80s, 25 tons per day of wood feed, making a chemical which is used as a food ingredient in barbecue sauce. And is nicknamed the liquid smoke process. The next plant was shipped to Malaysia. It's a 2-ton per hour biomass pyrolysis plant, which was operated in Malaysia. And then this process was scaled up even further to a production plant, which is now operating in Enschede in the Netherlands at 5 tons per hour of biomass feed. That's a fairly new project. This slide is a little bit out of date. It's probably 2 years out of date. I apologize for that. And not all these projects were built by Zeton, but you can see the companies that are operating at different scales from pilot to demonstration to production. And my final slide is slide 59. This information was presented, some of it was presented in a paper, and for those that are interested, I'd be happy to provide a copy of that, talking about some of the solutions to the problems that pyrolysis processes cause as you scale them up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Very interesting presentation. It puts a face to many of the pilot and demonstration plants that we see in the literature. The next speaker is Kathy Rain. She is the director of the Business and Finance Group of Lee Enterprises. She's a chemical engineer and an accredited senior appraiser. The title of her presentation is Financing Pyrolysis Ventures. Kathy?
Thank you, Jerry. As Gerald mentioned, in addition to my role as a machinery and equipment appraiser with my own independent practice, I manage the business and finance team for Lee Enterprises. Our team includes individuals with experience in grant writing, grant research, financial planning, funding and capital structuring, project finance, pilot plant design, feasibility studies, offtake agreements, project evaluation, and much more. For this audience, I realize how difficult it can be to get funding for newer technologies, so I'm going to be focusing my statements on some of our success stories specific to this industry. And here on slide 62, at the level of seed funding, our grant writer and researcher, Mindy Collier, has written 5 successful grant applications under USDA programs, totaling over $1 million for projects based in 4 different states. Mindy's also familiar with DOE funding for emerging technologies through the DOE Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy Program. Moving on to slide 63. At our pilot funding level, our funding expert, Jeff Kistner, has extensive experience in this area. He successfully raised over $1 billion for the construction of renewable energy plants over the past 10 years. His expertise includes funding for the early stages of development, PP&E, and operating capital. On slide 63, at the full-scale level of funding, we're also involved at this range of financing is our legal partner, Sullivan & Worcester. Lee Enterprises works closely with their attorneys, Eli Hinckley, Jim Rathall, Van Hildebrand. Their funding expertise includes all types of renewable energy technology, including emerging technologies. Specifically, they represented an investment company in its acquisition of several food waste to energy facilities. They also negotiated the power purchase agreements, interconnection agreements, and real estate details of several solar plants. We look forward to assisting our emerging technology clients in all phases of project development and financing. And I believe Wayne is going to be speaking next.
Well, thank you, Kathy. That was a very interesting presentation. Before we turn it over to Wayne, we have a handful of questions that have come into the group. We still have a few minutes to try to tackle some of them. Some of them I've just looked at, and we won't be able to tackle right now, but we will get back to everyone who's asked questions. The first question that I'd like to, I'll start off myself. The question is from Terry, who's asked, the Kior story had a sad ending. What do you think it would have made the Kior technology successful? Oil price, cost of feed, yield of bio oil. I'll give my own personal opinion about Kior, and it's my opinion. I don't have any inside information on exactly what happened. Kior was certainly the last high-profile pyrolysis venture that failed. It had a who's who of financial background, an excellent technology team. It's my opinion that a lot of these high-profile ventures have failed is because they've been forced to scale up too quickly before all the kinks have been taken out of the technology. This is largely forced upon them by the investment community. And what happens when you scale up, let's say 10 times or even 100 times in some cases, and some of the kinks are still in the technology, it costs you 10 times more to get them fixed. They're hard to run, and anyway, that's my opinion on what happened to Kior. I'll open up to the other people. Doug, do you have an opinion on what happened with Kior?
No, I'm not that familiar with the Kior situation.
Okay, David, are you?
Yeah, we designed and built several plants for Kior, and certainly they functioned the way they were intended to. But in terms of the reason why Kior is no longer in business, I don't know the answer to that.
Does anyone else have any comments about the Kior situation? Okay. A question from Sean. Is there a good list to reference for quality materials that make the best biochar? You're the obvious one to answer that one.
Well, to be honest, the material is any plant matter. Basically, either woods or grasses all can be converted into biochar. The difference is that grass will have a higher ash content, so you'll have a lower yield of the actual biochar. But the fact, though, it is the conversion process that's much more critical in making a quality biochar than the initial lignocellulosic material that's brought in. And I'm going to catch the next question at the same time, which is biochar still carbon negative when one takes into account the energy needed to pyrolyze biomass? It turns out the energy required to pyrolyze the biomass represents only about 5% of the total energy available in the biomass. The pyrolysis process actually rejects somewhere between 0.5% to 60% of the total energy as a wood gas that can be siphoned off and used as a low BTU, 150 to 250 BTUs a square foot, or, well, I can't do it in my head to the metric, sorry. and about 30% of the energy is retained as unburned carbon in the biochar, representing 50% of the carbon atom. So it's a very favorable energy yield, and it is not a burden to pyrolyze the biomass in terms of carbon negativity. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. Next question is from Pavel. It's an intriguing one. From an economic point of view, and also greenhouse gas intensity, what makes more sense, thermochemical route or biological route like biogas? The goal is transportation fuel, methane, gasoline, diesel, ethanol, and energy content. I'll just make a general comment about this. I think it depends on the circumstances very much that you're involved in. Certainly the biochemical route is the most commercially developed and most successful. I think certainly when you're talking about a transportation fuel, it's my opinion, even though I'm a big fan of pyrolysis, probably the biochemical route is the preferred, but again, it depends on the biomass that's available and the circumstances. Doug, do you want to jump in here?
I'm not an expert in that area either. Frankly, I've been reading some of the other questions where I'm more an expert, actually.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions about that or comments about that?
I think there's this is Hugh McLaughlin. I think there's a tremendous amount of research being done on both these areas, and frankly, it comes down to the breakthroughs, because historically we do not have an off-the-shelf either thermochemical route or biochemical route that is competitive with current fossil fuel alternatives or options. So, we had Fischer-Tropsch for many, many years, and we've had fermentation for even more. But we need the next generation of technologies to be competitive against fossil carbon.
Thank you for that. Any other comments about that question? Okay. The next question is from Carlo. What are the feedstocks for these plants? What is the cost to procure these feedstocks, and how much feedstocks is available in each market? I don't think any of us can answer that. Anything that's biomass can generally go into a pyrolysis reactor. It is very much a versatile technology in regard to that respect. Do any of my colleagues have some comments about this question?
Yeah, Doug here. Feedstocks to date have mostly been forest related. I know that Ensign uses sawmill residues for its feedstock from local sawmills. The one that was really interesting, though, was Fortum, because Fortum was the first plant to use both sawmill residues and forest harvest residues. What proportion of the feedstock is forest harvest residues, I don't know, but that tends to be much more expensive than from a sawmill. I think forest residues must cost something like $65 to $75 a bone dry ton. So they can still use some relatively expensive feedstocks and still make it work for their plant. I do know also that the Ensign plant, which is proposed for Malaysia, will use palm empty fruit bunches. Both Ensign and Dynamote have succeeded in making a good pyrolysis oil from palm empty fruit bunches. And for that matter, I think it was Empero built its pilot in Malaysia using palm empty fruit bunches. So it took its technology using that feedstock, but I believe it's using more of a woody feedstock in its Netherlands plant.
Thank you for that. Is there any other comments? The next question is from Edward, and I'll let my engineering friends quickly answer this one. How many tons of biomass are required to produce 1 gigajoule of bioenergy from pyrolysis oil? Doug, do you have that at your fingertips?
Well, I do know that pyrolysis oil is around 18 gigajoules per ton. That's a bone dry or per ton of pyrolysis oil, and the yield of pyrolysis oil is anywhere from 62 to 71% pyrolysis oil per ton of biomass. So, I mean, those are the two figures you need. He can figure it out on a calculator in 20 seconds.
Okay.
This is Hugh McLaughlin. I'll comment that going through pyrolysis oil probably affects that conversion. If you were to go from biomass to just a wood gas or a combustible wood gas fuel, you would have probably 10 gigajoules a ton of the 20 that's contained in the biomass. To go through the pyrolysis oil conversion gives it better versatility, but it does cost a little bit of the efficiency because there's another processing step.
Okay. Any other comments? We have time for one or two more questions. And again, we will get back to the remainder separately. A question from Carlo again. What about sulfur levels in the pyrolysis oil? Doug, do you want to comment about that?
Yeah, sure, I'll handle that one. As far as I understand it, sulfur levels in pyrolysis oil are not zero, but as close to zero as you can get. They're essentially negligible. So this is one of the benefits in economics where you may get bonuses or benefits not only from the CO2 reduction, but also sulfur reduction compared to the fuel with which it's substituted. So it's very, very low. It's almost zero.
Any other comments? I'd just like to add that generally biomass has fairly low levels of sulfur to begin with, and any little bits that there are relatively volatile to begin with. One last question, which was from Eric. This will be for Doug. Given the bioenergy goals Japan has set out for 2030 of some 50 terawatts, what fraction of this could be taken up by biomass thermal conversion?
Gee, that's a really good question. I'm not in a position to answer it at this point. I'd go back over my notes, I suppose. But in Japan, it's certainly limited by the amount of biomass that's available. Japanese tend to like to use their own biomass. Unfortunately, a lot of their forest feedstock is too young. The average age is more like 50 or 60 years. So they don't have a lot of woody biomass that they can actually use for energy. As for other biomass sources, I don't know. I don't know.
Any comments from anyone else? Okay, we're essentially near the end of our presentation. We will get back to the other people who've been kind enough to send questions in with some answers. And I'll turn it over to Wayne to wrap things up.
Thank you, Gerald. And I thank everybody I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. I know for many of our listeners who are experts in their own right, this was probably pretty informative. For some, there's probably been a good volume of really technical information delivered in an hour period. Not to worry, the entire presentation will be available, will not only be sent to you, but will be available on our website tomorrow. It'll be sent to you also, but it may be too big for some emails. If you need to contact any of today's speakers, you can either call us here at Lee Enterprises Consulting or you can email them directly. Their emails are listed on this slide. And then finally, on behalf of our entire team at Lee Enterprises Consulting, and in particular Dr. Kootenai and the Emerging Technologies Group, I want to thank you again for attending. We're seeing lots of new inquiries in the emerging technology space, and we look forward to assisting any of you that we can help. And with that, this concludes our webinar. Thanks to everybody for attending.